Hey guys, tonight we slip into the life of a man whose name you probably don't know, but whose invention has been clinking and sliding through your daily routine without you even noticing. That's right, you're about to drift through the entire life of the guy who gave the world the zipper. You're lying there in bed, maybe under a blanket that doesn't even have one, but your jacket on the chair probably does. And your trousers tomorrow morning certainly will. The funny thing is, if zippers suddenly vanished, you'd be stuck fumbling with buttons until you gave up and decided society had collapsed. You probably wouldn't survive this, so before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I'd love to know, where are you listening from tonight? And what's your local time? Post it in the comments now. Dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You begin in the calm stretches of mid-19th century Chicago, where Whitcomb L. Judson first opens his curious eyes to a world still clinging to horses and oil lamps. He's born in 1846, and you picture him as the kind of restless child who fidgets with shoelaces until he knots them beyond recognition. He grows up in a time where the clunkiest part of life is, well, almost everything. Boots take forever to lace, carriages creak down muddy roads, and shirts bristle with buttons that feel like a personal vendetta against your morning routine. Judson's boyhood isn't some Hollywood drama. It's quiet, trudges through chores, likely spends evenings by the hearth, and sneaks away moments to fiddle with bits of scrap metal. That's how you start to see the pattern. Boredom meets curiosity, and out comes invention. His neighbors might not have noticed much, but this ordinary boy was filing away frustrations with life's inefficiencies: buttons that pop, shoes that tangle, belts that sag. By the time he's a teenager, the Civil War is rumbling in the background. The country itself is fastening itself back together, though clumsily, like a button forced through the wrong hole. Historians still argue whether Whitcomb's service in the war gave him a taste for discipline and machines. But either way, the world he steps into after adolescence is one begging for easier solutions. He heads toward Oberlin College in Ohio, a rare pursuit for someone from his background. You imagine him trudging across campus with notebooks tucked under his arm, distracted not by Latin or philosophy, but by gears and levers. The mainstream fact you can cling to here: Oberlin was one of the most progressive colleges of its time, teaching both men and women and welcoming students of different races. A quirky side note: students there were banned from eating cake during weekday meals, a bizarre rule, though maybe good training for inventors who'd later need patience with fiddly fasteners. Judson doesn't stay long. College feels too much like a lecture in patience when he's itching for the clang of tools. He leaves before finishing, convinced that ideas come better in workshops than classrooms. You nod along. Maybe you've felt that urge yourself. That sense that learning by doing is worth more than any diploma. And though he never graduates, he carries with him a habit of tackling practical problems head-on. When you look at his childhood through a sleepy lens, you see more than dusty towns and wooden fences. You see a mind filing grievances, laces too, long buttons too stubborn, clasps too breakable. Each annoyance becomes a little pebble in his shoe, pushing him toward invention. And even if the boy doesn't know it yet, he's setting himself up to spend a lifetime pulling at the tangled strings of daily life, trying to make them run smooth. There's a hint of irony in imagining him today, his name forgotten, his creation everywhere. Tomorrow, when you tug at your zipper without thinking, you're touching the result of those restless boyhood evenings. You're touching Whitcomb Judson's impatience with the world. And that impatience is about to grow legs and walk with him out of his hometown, straight into railroads, business deals, and some of the most awkward demonstrations an inventor ever staged. You follow young Whitcomb Judson as he leaves behind the safe lull of his Midwestern upbringing and lurches into the rattle and clang of the railroads. It's the late 1860s, and America is still patching its wounds after the Civil War. Steam whistles split the air, sparks leap from wheels, and you imagine him trudging along dusty train platforms, hat pulled low, watching locomotives thunder past, as if they're the very heartbeat of progress. Judson doesn't just ride trains, he works around them, finding himself in the orbit of mechanical innovation. You picture him bent over crude blueprints, muttering under his breath and dreaming of clever shortcuts. The railroad life is practical, dirty, and full of small frustrations, couplings that pinch fingers, engines that seize, and yes, boots that take forever to lace before a shift. His restless ambition finds fuel here, surrounded by noise, heat, and a sense that machines are the future. One mainstream historical fact anchors him to this era. The railroads were exploding across America, linking small towns to big cities at a pace never seen before. They weren't just transport, they were transformation. Yet inside all that grand progress, Judson is daydreaming about shoe fasteners. While his peers dream of laying track to California, he's distracted by the fact that laces remain the fiddliest part of his morning. That's Judson's quirk. He can't let little inefficiencies slide. You might roll your eyes, but imagine the daily irritation, waking before dawn, fumbling with stiff leather boots, tugging laces until your fingers ache, only for the knot to unravel later in mud. For Judson, this isn't trivial, it's an itch in his brain. He starts to sketch an easier way. His mind whispers, what if you could just slide something shut? Historians still argue whether he ever had a genuine breakthrough during these railroad years, or if he mostly toyed with ideas without building much. Some accounts paint him as a frustrated dreamer, sketching endless contraptions that never left the page. Others suggest he cobbled together rough devices, odd little clips and clasps that clinked in his pockets while he paced station platforms. Either way, you sense the same restlessness, that drive to make the world run smoother, faster, less annoyingly. And let's be honest, you've had mornings where you cursed at your shoelaces too. Maybe Judson would have been your hero if only he had nailed the design right there and then. But invention, like railroads, takes time. And Judson's ambition is too big for his pocket notebook. He begins to dabble in entrepreneurship, wandering through jobs and partnerships like a man who can't quite settle down. He tries his hand at mechanical oddities, something to do with a horseshoeing machine here, an improved motor there. One quirky detail that makes you chuckle. He once pitched a kind of motorized streetcar system, claiming it would revolutionize urban travel. Spoiler alert, it didn't. Investors yawned, competitors snorted, and Judson shrugged and moved on. He's like that one friend with a new business idea every month. Only his involved grease, springs, and the occasional explosion. Through all this, his obsession with fastening keeps simmering. While everyone else sees railroads as steel veins pumping life across the nation, Judson sees shoes and belts that still take too long to manage. It sounds laughable, but his stubborn focus is exactly what keeps him tinkering, and as you lie here, can almost picture him trudging down a noisy rail yard at sunset, soot streaking his coat, hands fiddling with a bit of bent wire in his pocket. He's not just a railroad man, he's a restless inventor in disguise, rehearsing solutions in his head that nobody else thinks worth the trouble. His ambition might not look like much yet, but you're beginning to see the outline of the zipper's ghost taking shape. You drift further into Judson's story, and by now, his tinkering has become almost a personality trait. He isn't just a railroad man anymore. He's an inventor with a growing stack of ideas. Many of them strange, many of them doomed. But you follow him anyway, because every odd contraption he builds pulls him 1 inch closer to the zipper you'll tug tomorrow morning without a thought. His first real patents circle around shoes. Imagine sitting at a wooden table as he proudly demonstrates what he calls a shoe fastener. It's 1889, and the idea is simple enough. Instead of looping and tying laces, you'd snap shoes closed with a series of hooks and catches, locked by a sliding mechanism. Sounds handy, right? Except it's bulky, clumsy, and prone to snagging. You picture a Victorian gentleman sweating in frustration, jamming the thing over his boot and muttering unrepeatable words as it jams. Not quite the sleek glide of the zippers, you know? Still, Judson believes in it. He files patents, knocks on factory doors, and pitches with that half-earnest, half-desperate energy all inventors share. A mainstream historical fact underscores this. By the late 19th century, patent offices were drowning in submissions. The age of invention was booming telephones, typewriters, electric lamps, and here comes Judson with a shoe fastener. You can almost hear the patent clerk's sigh, but quirky tidbits make his story livelier. One rumor insists that Judson carried around his prototypes in a small velvet-lined case like jewelry, flipping them open at parties to anyone polite enough not to run away. Whether true or not, you imagine the awkward silences when guests smiled weakly and steered the conversation back to dessert. His contraptions fascinated him far more than they did anyone else. Historians still argue whether Judson himself actually used his inventions in daily life. Did he walk around proudly, clicking his shoes shut with his ungainly fastener, or did even he secretly prefer regular laces? It's the kind of detail lost to time, but you picture him stubbornly demonstrating it on himself, ignoring snickers from the audience, and the clumsy gadgets keep multiplying. He dabbles in pneumatic systems, streetcar motors, and clasping devices that nobody really needs. You trail him into dim workshops littered with springs, screws, and failed dreams, where each invention ends up like a badly folded laundry pile. He's chasing breakthroughs, but tripping over practicality. Yet, here's the thing. You sense persistence more than failure. Judson doesn't stop. He keeps sketching, keeps filing, keeps building. For every prototype that sputters, another idea clinks into place. That restless determination is what makes his story oddly admirable. Even if his devices look more like medieval torture equipment than helpful gadgets, he refuses to give up. So, as you listen, you're lulled not by his success, because he doesn't have much yet, but by his relentless belief that small annoyances matter. A stuck lace, a jammed button, a clumsy clasp. Judson treats them as dragons worth slaying. He isn't chasing glory, he's chasing convenience. And though the world still yawns at his efforts, you can see the outline sharpening, because the zipper isn't some random stroke of genius. It's the product of years of awkward, clunky, almost laughable experiments that you've just strolled through. Tomorrow, when you tug that smooth little slider up your jacket, you'll know it didn't come easy. It came from a man willing to look foolish, carrying prototypes in velvet cases, and insisting that life's tiniest frustrations were worth fixing. And right now, lying in bed, you're tracing that stubborn thread right alongside him. You shuffle along with Judson into one of his strangest stages yet, the moment he decides to show his invention to the world. It's 1893, and the setting couldn't be grander. The Chicago World's Fair, a spectacle of technology, culture, and human ambition. Picture glowing electric lights dazzling the crowds, enormous Ferris wheels creaking against the skyline, and inventions ranging from moving sidewalks to early dishwashers. And tucked into this carnival of progress is Whitcomb Judson nervously, clutching his ungainly little clasp locker. He calls it a slide fastener, though in truth it looks more like a miniature torture rack. You hover with him in a cramped demonstration booth where visitors drift in and out, some curious, some just hunting for popcorn. Judson sets a boot on the table, proudly attaches his clasp locker, and slides the metal catch. It jams. He tugs harder. The crowd shifts uncomfortably. Someone coughs. The mainstream historical fact is that yes, Judson really did exhibit his device at the Chicago World's Fair, officially introducing it to the public. But it was less of a triumph and more of an awkward shrug. His invention worked, inconsistently at best. Imagine trying to zip your coat, only for the teeth to misalign so badly you'd end up stuck, half-dressed in the street. Not ideal for winning investors. A quirky tidbit that's almost too good to skip. One account suggests that Judson had to keep extra boots on hand because his fasteners sometimes mangled the leather beyond repair. So while the crowd might have seen him calmly demonstrating, behind the scenes, he was swapping out ruined shoes like a stage magician, palming cards. It's equal parts comedy and tragedy, and historians still argue whether his booth drew any genuine excitement at all. Some say curious fairgoers lingered, marveling at the possibility of never tying laces again. Others insist most visitors rolled their eyes and walked off toward more impressive exhibits like Edison's light bulbs or the new electric railway. After all, in an era of jaw-dropping machinery, a fiddly shoe-closing gadget felt a bit underwhelming. You can almost feel his embarrassment as you drift beside him, watching another failed demonstration sputter out. He smiles, wipes sweat from his brow, and insists that the next version will work better. You admire that he refuses to slink away, even as his booth feels more like a comedy sketch than an innovation pitch. Still, this moment matters. Without it, the zipper's story would never leave the dusty confines of Judson's workshop. Here, in the cacophony of the World's Fair, his oddball idea steps onto the public stage for the first time. And even though most people ignore it, you sense a shift, like the first awkward draft of a book that will one day become a bestseller. As the fair winds down, Judson packs up his prototypes. They rattle in their velvet case as he trudges back to his rented room, half disappointed, half defiant. He knows the crowd didn't cheer, the investors didn't swoon, and the newspapers barely noticed. But somewhere inside him, that stubborn thread keeps tugging. He's convinced that one day, its awkward clasp locker will matter. And you listening now can't help but smile at the irony. Because tonight, you already know how the story ends. The zipper will conquer the world. But poor Judson, he's still in that dim Chicago booth, grinning nervously, swapping out another mangled boot, hoping the next visitor will see what he sees. You trailed Judson back from the fair, and what lingers in the air isn't triumph. It's the faint smell of disappointment mixed with shoe leather. Investors aren't lining up. Critics aren't singing praises. And yet he clings to his contraption like a man convinced he's holding lightning in a bottle. Only, in his case, the lightning keeps flickering out halfway up the boot, so he sets about chasing support the old-fashioned way. Letters, meetings, polite begging. You watch him march into drawing rooms with his velvet case of prototypes, snapping them open like a stage magician about to reveal a rabbit. But instead of applause, there are furrowed brows, skeptical murmurs, and the occasional chuckle. One businessman leans back in his chair, fiddles with his pocket watch, and says what they all seem to think. Why bother fixing something as simple as shoelaces? That becomes Judson's recurring nightmare, trying to convince the world that little conveniences matter. Mainstream history is full of stories like his. Early inventors laughed off because the world wasn't ready. Remember when people said cars would never replace horses, or that nobody would need a telephone in every home? Judson's zipper joins that long tradition of underestimation. He responds the only way he knows how, with stubbornness. He tinkers and files more patents, determined to improve the design. By the mid-1890s, he stacked up applications like a gambler stacking chips at a losing table. He even forms a small company with backers who, perhaps out of pity or curiosity, decide to throw some money his way. They set up shop in Hoboken, New Jersey, of all places, a city that, at the time, was better known for breweries than revolutionary fasteners. Here comes the quirky detail. The company was originally called the Universal Fastener Company. Doesn't exactly roll off the tongue, does it? You imagine the logo in your mind, a stiff banner on factory stationery, promising a universal product that in truth barely worked on a single boot. The irony almost makes you laugh. But Judson's persistence pays off in one small way. Patents keep getting granted. He's like a collector, proudly tacking each certificate to his workshop wall, even if the devices themselves rarely leave the shelf. Historians still argue whether these patents were more about ego than practicality. Some suggest he cared more about the recognition of being an inventor than the messy reality of building something people would buy. Others defend him, saying the failures were necessary steps toward eventual success. Meanwhile, sales remain pitiful. Imagine a dusty storeroom filled with unsold clasped lockers, each one a monument to optimism. Workers assemble them half-heartedly, knowing most will never see daylight. You stand beside Judson as he paces the floor, insisting to anyone who will listen that the world just doesn't get it yet. And maybe he's right, because hidden in all these failures is the seed of something genuinely useful. His contraption isn't smooth, elegant, or even reliable, but it plants the idea. It says, what if you could close things quickly, easily, with a single pull? And that thought is powerful enough to stick. So Judson keeps showing up, keeps making his pitch. Investors roll their eyes, skeptics shake their heads, and yet he refuses to quit. You sense the quiet tragedy here. He's the kind of man who carries his failures like they're proof of destiny. Each rejection just convinces him he's early, not wrong, and lying here tonight. Drifting into his world, you can almost admire that delusion. Because if Judson had listened to the laughter, if he'd stopped lugging around that velvet case, the zipper might never have happened at all. You drift with Judson deeper into the grind of invention. And this time, the scene isn't glamorous at all. No World's Fair crowds, no gaslight sparkle, just drafty workshops and factory floors that smell of oil, leather, and frustration. It's the mid-1890s now, and Judson's Universal Fastener Company is limping along. More dream than business. You wander through one of those dim spaces with him, where tables are cluttered with pliers, rivets, and dusty prototypes, stacked like crooked playing cards. Men in suspenders hammer away half-heartedly, producing a trickle of class blockers. No one is buying. The whole room feels like a waiting room for failure. And yet, Judson, pacing with papers under his arm, treats it like the launch pad of a new age. He files patent after patent, stacking them higher than the actual sales receipts. The mainstream historical fact here: Judson filed over 30 patents related to fastening devices throughout his career. Most of them tweaks that didn't fix the fundamental flaws. His designs were clever on paper, but clumsy in practice, like building a castle from cards that keep slipping apart. And there's a quirky tidbit, too. Some of these early prototypes were so over-engineered they required special tools to adjust. Imagine needing a screwdriver just to close your shoes in the morning. You laugh, but Judson saw elegance in it. Convinced that people would gladly trade laces for his complicated sliding contraption. It's a bit like inventing a self-stirring coffee mug that still spills everywhere. Brilliant in concept. It's exhausting in reality. Historians still argue whether these years were the peak of his stubbornness or the quiet beginning of his legacy. Some biographers frame him as a tragic figure, churning out failures, until others swooped in to perfect his work. Others argue he deserves genuine credit. Without his persistence, there'd be no foundation to improve. Both views leave you hovering in that workshop, watching him hunched over yet another sketch, muttering about smoother teeth and stronger clasps. Meanwhile, the patents keep arriving in neat envelopes. Judson pins them to the wall like badges of honor, even as factory shelves sag with unsold stock. He's proud, almost defiantly so. He insists history will thank him one day, though at the moment, history seems to be snickering behind his back. You trail him home one evening, where his wife watches with quiet concern as he unpacks another failed sample from his satchel. He explains how this version is different, how this tweak will change everything, how tomorrow the orders will flood in. She smiles, nods, and sets dinner on the table, probably thinking of bills rather than boots. It's a small, tender moment one you rarely hear in grand tales of invention. But it anchors Judson as a man, not just a quirky footnote. By now, you feel the weight of his life, restless ambition turning into stubborn routine. He files another patent. He oversees another batch of unsold devices. He insists the zipper is just one improvement away. And you lie here, imagining his cluttered desk, his ink-stained fingers, his endless drafts. In these years, Judson doesn't create success, but he creates possibility. A flawed possibility, sure, but one that will one day slide neatly through jackets, jeans, and backpacks across the world. His factories may be dusty, and his balance sheets may be red, but he's keeping the idea alive long enough for someone else to rescue it. And that's where you leave him, tonight, pacing a factory floor that smells of oil and desperation, lutching. Another prototype that barely works, yet convinced, utterly convinced that he's fastening together the future.